I've played just shy of 200 hours of New World, and I'm ready to come to a conclusion on the game which has consumed the last 3 weeks of my life, and I'll do my absolute best to be succinct. If you want to play New World for the story, don't. This game's story is not bad, just utterly forgettable, and none of the characters leave a lasting impression. The critical path functions as a loose framework for leveling from 1 to 60, but spends far too much time sending you away to meet leveling criteria via other means. Kind of like a disinterested parent who just wants you to get out of their hair so they can hang out with their single friends. Conversely, in terms of character progression, New World does a lot right. The stats make sense, and while abilities need balancing, the choice is largely down to playstyle preference rather than one overpowered build that just does everything great. Stats on gear can roll randomly, and this is very useful for hybrid builds or for secondary weapons. This element also keeps what little is left of the crafting economy alive. You gain character XP by leveling crafting professions, farming mobs, and finishing quests, and most gear falls into a tier and rarity system that we've seen before in other games, which makes it quite easy to pick up for veterans. Crafting and gathering are an excellent part of this game. However, the crafting benches do seem to take frequent hits as a result of invasions, so when you're getting up there towards the tier 4 and tier 5 benches, it's a good idea to keep some Azoth around for a quick teleport. The weapon mastery system is a bit of a double-edged sword. It feels like an unnecessary gate for unlocking abilities, yet it also feels like a really good way of rewarding players that manage to play and dedicate themselves to a specific weapon. You can only unlock 6 abilities with each weapon, which does feel very restrictive, almost in an arbitrary way. It could do with being a lot deeper and having more diverse skills that truly allow you to make your build your own, but I completely understand why this is what we've got as the base game. This can be built on as things go. Other methods of character progression include using faction and territory reputation. These are essentially just numbers to grind for that have rudimentary unlocks like access to buying player housing or a better tier or a better level of faction gear to buy. The missions associated with these are very tedious, but provide just enough XP to make it worth it. Combat in general feels quite limited. In PvE, it's very, click, 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 and use your abilities on cooldown. And in PvP, it's quite predictable. But it certainly functions well enough that you can enjoy yourself, particularly when you find a weapon you like. No matter how I tried, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that only having 3 abilities to equip per weapon was very restrictive, and it felt like a console-friendly design choice rather than one for a PC flagship MMO. Enemy diversity is quite lacking in PvE, and some of the skin changes from a cougar to a lynx or a turkey to a peacock feel quite low effort at best. I've made my opinion on the travel system quite clear in my previous 2 reviews, and however the developers want to adapt and evolve this is fine with me. It's just very clear that how it is at the moment, it's a huge inconvenience and needs a quality of life refresh at the very least. Let's talk a little bit about endgame content. The majority of the game's endgame content is based around group activities such as expeditions, elite farming, corruption portals, and invasions and wars. Solo players can look forward to owning a house and the free fast travel, global buffs, and storage chests that can really improve the gameplay experience. They're quite nice. House prices are fine. You have to amass 10,000 gold for the best first house and 20,000 gold for any subsequent houses of that tier. The weekly rent can start to get up there. I don't know if it's just me or whether the economy is in-game just not quite working as it should. I only ever just seem to scrape enough money together to pay rent and never really contribute to my overall savings. Expeditions or New World's instance dungeons are mostly the same as what you'll experience before you hit the level cap. Obviously these have better loot, the bosses tend to be a bit harder, and you have to have a better build to get into them and do them. The main issue with these is how harshly they're gated. Outside of your first freebie tuning orb that you get usually with a quest, acquiring a subsequent one is an absolute chore. I've played 140 hours of this game before I had enough materials to make another 1 tuning orb. So unfortunately, if you want to do some dungeon farming, you are going to have to put in significant time in the game beforehand. In many ways, this helps the game feel at odds with itself. Some elements of the game feel like they're not designed for you to grind, like the appalling storage limit that you get by default. Yet others, like the tuning orbs and how to create them, that feels like the game's telling you to go out and grind. So there's a bit of a mixed message there across the board. Invasions in particular are this game's ace in the hole. Absolutely the best mode in New World, without a doubt. This is a wave defense mode that sees 50 players band together to fight waves of corrupted enemies from the forts that you may have seen in the wars. This is a lot of fun. It's without a doubt the best mode in the game in my opinion, but these modes do tend to be very restrictive. Anyone over level 50 can join and help, but there are companies that are kicking players out. I've had this happen to me twice now, where they just cycle you out regardless of what level you are because you are not part of their company. They can essentially cycle everybody out by kicking them and then essentially fill the ranks with only their own company. I get why they would want to do that, but I don't understand why this is still in the game. There are 3 neutral zones at the top area of the map. Why isn't there a neutral fort there that anybody could sign up and join and defend? This is one of the game's best modes, and it feels like there's an unnecessary gate there, and this time it's other players that are booting you. In Wars, which is the PvP version of that, these end up being quite similar. It's not just companies that are excluding you here, it's other players regardless of company, and it's mostly based on levels. Even after the first week in the game, there were people kicking you from these modes if you were not level 60, and I have seen some level 60 players get kicked just because they've said, "Hi, it's my first time in a war." This is some of MMO elitist behavior, and it's absolute worst. Your other option for PvP is the Outpost Rush Battleground. This was disabled when I got to 60 and I didn't get a chance to take part. I was quite excited to try PvP in an MMO for the first time since OG Arctic Valley, but it just didn't seem to be. Open world PvP on my server is dead, and it seems to be the case on other servers too, as one faction is overpowering the rest and there's very little in the way of organic conflict. The game is desperately missing a zone similar to the Division's Dark Zone. If you ask me, that is the solution for this. Create a PvPvE zone where players can go, and then faction doesn't matter. It's just a bit of a free-for-all, and you can get some of the best loot in the game. Not the best loot, but like some of the best loot. In terms of an overall experience, New World has been very toxic, even for an MMO. Botting in the early days was out of control, and even the AFK changes which brought in and really helped the queue times, still a couple of them got by. Phishing botting is still a major issue within New World. There's lots of people who are out there claiming to have been banned for using inappropriate language. Yes, I've seen a lot of you. You are being banned for the right reason. There are also some legitimate mechanical issues. Character animation glitches, strange maintenance times for EU and Asian Australian players, server capacity issues. Then there's further in-game issues relating to storage and travel. The economy feels tightly tuned. Coin doesn't seem to have anywhere near as much value as it should because you're not getting enough of it. Swimming, or lack thereof in the game, is another weird omission. And a filtering system for the compass needs adding sooner rather than later because that thing can get overcrowded when you get higher levels. What I will say is that I don't think any of these are game-breaking. This game is creaking and groaning with things that need to be fixed, but it's not broken yet. This actually feels like a good foundation upon which to build a successful MMO if it can address its major flaw quickly. That major flaw is a severe lack of content, and a lot of the content that is there at the moment, like Wars and Invasions, tend to be withheld from the average player and hoarded by companies who got there first. This game has no regard for players that can only play for an hour or two a day. If you're a player who can play for 4 or 5 hours a day, but you can't play at specific times because of your job or a life commitment or your kids or any real-world limitation on your playing time, there's a chance you may never get to take part in Invasions and Wars because these are set at specific times. I'm not asking the game to be doable solo. I know that's not how MMOs work. I've played enough of them to know that eventually you needed other players to do a lot of the content. But some quality of life improvements here, just to prevent people being restricted from doing these, would be nice. Particularly as the game is a multiplayer game. You don't want to put off all these players who are coming in and joining the community and who might be shy and solo and be looking, hey, maybe I can find a place here. As things are, it feels like the game is throwing out its arm to block you from doing the cool things it does have. I expect for the rest of 2021 that this game is not a good idea if you are a solo player. I would even extend that to players who only have 1 or 2 friends that want to play with them. New World is by no means a bad game, and compared to many other MMOs, the launch state of this game was excellent. Aside from the queues, technically this was one of the better MMO launches I've been part of, but harsh gating on these activities, balancing inconsistencies, and other little niggles just tell me that this game was not ready to come out when it did. The main systems are here. The main foundation for making a good game in New World is in the game as it is, but there needs to be at least double the amount of content, and it needs to stop so harshly gating players from getting there. This needs a rethink. I would not recommend for solos.